Doug, first off, tell me, how did you first get started interviewing people, interviewing subject matter experts?
Well, great question, Jeff. I started really doing a lot of interviewing in a way for selfish reasons to build my own personal brand. I've done a lot of interviews, whether they've been in the field or online virtually. But 10 years ago, out in the field, interviewing people at events, meetups when we had events and conferences, and talking to people, building that content. So I've always enjoyed interviews. I've always enjoyed entertainment, the arts of interviewing. So being able to interview experts, you learn from experts, and it's a reflection on your personal brand.
Do you remember the first interview that you did?
That's a great question. I really started getting into it in about 2010 at events, first paid interview, but obviously once we came out the womb, we started talking to people and being interviewed. But, that's a great question. At that point, I've done a lot of interviews, but I've really taken the craft of interviewing and creating content really since about 2010.
Okay. So today then, typically what type of people do you interview?
I mainly work, and it's documented on my LinkedIn profile, is I work with sales, speakers, and trainers, people in the sales and service industries, because that's my background, my skill set. So it's interviewing people that I really know because I'm one of them. So I've made my interview process really with sales and service trainers.
So you do both online interviews like this and also in-person interviews at events. Is that what you said?
Yes, I started out really doing in-person interviews where you're standing out and you're holding a microphone and you're talking to one or two people and dictating that. And then obviously going online through the internet, especially since COVID and prior to that, we've got these tools that, like we're using right now, StreamYard, allow you to do interviews. Like, you're in Oklahoma, I'm in Atlanta right now, and we're doing the interview. But I first started out doing face-to-face. Then the pandemic kind of made the shift to doing more online virtual events. But an interview, Jeff, as you know, you've done quite a few of them, is an interview, whether you're face-to-face, asking those right questions, or doing it online virtually.
With regards to the live events, can you do that by yourself, or do you need a team to set that up?
I was a one-man band, a one-man hype machine. I had a tripod, a microphone, and on the tripod on the camera, it had a viewfinder so I could frame the shot so both people are in there, and I would record it and film it myself. Normally, you would want somebody like a spotter to run the camera to make sure you're in the frame, just pick up on the things, an extra set of eyes that you don't see from a director's perspective. But I was able to, because I learned it myself, just doing interviews with preparation and practice, setting up the tripod and framing people in the shot. And then the real work, as you know, is taking that footage and editing the process.
All right. So let's say that you've got an interview set up. What do you do to prepare for the interview? What does your preparation process look like?
Well, I love that question because preparation is everything when it comes to content creation and interviewing. So if I'm interviewing, let's say you perhaps, first thing I would most likely do is go to your social networking sites, your company website. I'd find out information about you. But where I really get into this is I love the art of the interviews. I'll see if Jeff has been interviewed. I'll watch some of your interviews that you've done if I've got the time. Surely you may have been on a podcast, a video interview, and I'll listen to those type of questions. I really want to think from the audience perspective when I'm doing my preparation. Everybody's going to go to the website. Everybody's going to get a bio. You may even get a bio sending out a request to the person you're interviewing. You'll have that information, but I think you have to do a little digging if that footage is available just to see how they interview. How do they ask questions? More importantly, I structure the research based on the benefit of my audience.
So how long does it take? How long does it take you to prepare properly for an interview?
That's a great question from a standpoint, and I'm going to throw another, it depends, but it's not hard to go to a LinkedIn profile, read the bio, check that out, listen to a couple interviews. I would say an hour, half an hour to an hour. But one thing about preparation, and I think we'll get into this, is you can actually do a preparation call with your guest. And I highly recommend that, going over the foundation, the context of the interview, because that's preparation in itself. But if you didn't have that ability, an hour, maybe an hour to 2 hours tops. If you know that person quite well, you can condense it to 15 minutes. So when it comes to depending, but really have a skill set on what you're looking to ask, and maybe ask those questions that the interviewee has not ever been asked. I think that's the exciting part of doing your homework, trying to get that information out to the benefit of your audience.
So what do you do then to prepare your guests beforehand for the interview?
Have a preparation call, maybe get on the phone, schedule a call, maybe do like what we're doing right now, having a video stream call, go over the questions, spend 15, 30 minutes with them to talk about the interview. You would send them an email. You did a great job of sending me a document with list questions and where the flow of the interview. So give them preparation documents. Have the interview call. That's great. But send them prior to that call a list of the objectives, like in sales and B2B selling and everything else. Having that discovery meeting, maybe having that not maybe, but having that information up front, those steps, the agenda list prior to even having a call. So create an agenda, email that agenda, and have a preparation call.
So let's talk about the questions, because
Sure.
they're really the foundation of an interview. How do you come up with questions? Do you share them with your guests? Do you sometimes ask surprise questions that you didn't talk about beforehand? How do you come up with good questions?
I think good questions come within the conversation, and a lot of those good questions happen if you do your preparation. If you do your preparation by having that pre-call, ask the guests in hand, what topics do you want me to touch on? Where do you want to take this interview? Have those questions. And by doing your research, look at the other questions they've already been asked and maybe spin those questions in a different way. The idea is, you've been there when you've interviewed, when the person gives you a response like, that's a good question. Oh, I didn't think about that. That's an insightful one. That's a great way to take it. Those are validation points that you've asked some insightful questions. So it's like giving them insight above the obvious. I mean, you can always ask those generic questions. How did you get started? Where are you from? That information can be found, but really dig a little deeper. And I think that comes from what I like to call social watching in your research. You were on an interview and you said this profound statement. I'm like, oh, I'm going to ask that question and have Jeff dig a little deeper. But the whole conversational flow, you ask me a question, I respond. You have to listen to be able to respond. And that's where the interview gets fun. You ask me a question, I give you a response that kind of left that response out there, and you can dig a little deeper on that if it's, again, insightful to you and your audience.
Okay, so now you're prepared. You've done all your prep work. You're ready to go. What tips, what advice do you have for doing the live interview itself?
Live interview, just kind of relax about it because it's live. If we're going live, it's not pre-recorded or it's not going to be edited afterwards. Advice, stay hydrated, have some rest, relax in the mode. There's so much going on, but just get your thoughts. If you're being interviewed, maybe have a few talking points that you want to bring up in the interview, but really just be prepared. And the best thing, and we hear this all the time, is listening to the questions and being able to respond. It's not a rush to judgment, not a rush. And it's not like a game show where you've got the first one to answer moves on the round and gets points, but being able to listen and being able to respond.
Okay, so you've got your list of questions that you're going to ask. How do you go about asking questions without making it look like it's an interrogation?
That comes down to the conversational style. If that guest answers, you've got a list of 10 questions. And if they start answering question number 7 and it's open-ended and they lead into question number 9, it's like you ask those open-ended questions to expound on that. So you don't want to say, okay, Jeff, question number 1, boom. Okay, question number 2. It's getting them to dig after that answers or being able to ask the question within the question. So I want to talk about some of the projects you're working on, and we may be talking about current sales initiatives, and you're talking about what you're working on. And then I'll say, well, what current projects you've got going on? You spoke on this. So kind of answer their question within a question. It's the conversational flow. It's not a step 1, step 2. You mix it up a little bit. And if they may very well, if they're talking, if they're giving you an answer to your question, they may answer future questions if you let them continue to speak. They may answer 2 questions within 1 question. That's what I was trying to say there.
So you mentioned 10 questions, for example. How many questions would you then have and prepare for an interview, let's say of 30 minutes?
Couple of things. I would have at least 5 on that just to tie it down to a number. You gave me a 30-minute parameter, and I love that because you gave me a context of the interview. If we're speaking, you just got off stage and it's live interview at a conference, that's a different environment. You got a lot of factors going around, but if you have a stage call, you can get infinite number of questions, but it also depends on the response time of the question. As you know, you've been on interviews and you ask a simple yes or no question, and you may get a 5-minute response. Well, that shoots you down the road for time frame in interviews. So I always go with 5, and I'm going to ask and build on that. I would always ask, is there anything else that we haven't covered today that you'd like to have? Any parting shots? That always closes the gap, so you've covered for your guests everything that they would like to speak on.
So give me some examples of your go-to questions. Like, what's your number one question that you always ask, or the top 3 questions that are always on your short list of 5? What are your favorite questions to ask your guests?
Sure. If I'm interviewing a speaker or an author, I always use this one because it's a good open-ended question. They've written a book. They've put a lot of time. They've got the book published. It's out on print. It's on, you're able to order the book. Is there anything in the book after it's been printed that you wish you would have put in the book? What would you added different? This is for an author, this case. Is there anything else that you would have added since you've written a book, or during that writing process, the journey of being a writer? What have you learned? So I'm using that as like, oh, I didn't think about that, or I wish I would have put it in this, or in fact, that's in my next book that I'm working on. So you're kind of leading them on. One of my favorite questions is, before we wrap this show up, I want to give you the second to last word for our viewers quickly. And I use the word quickly. If you could just elaborate what you have going on and where can we find out more information? Now, we know that question. To answer that, go to their website, look at their social networking sites, but just give them the floor to close it out. So, anything else, Jeff, that you would like to add for our audience before we close this out quickly? So I've kind of staged you. I've anchored you to talk on something, but we've also been able to wrap it up. So those are 2 examples, one being with an author and one being with a general business person that you're interviewing.
Back to the live interview itself, what tips, what advice do you have for guests to be able to look and sound their best on an interview?
One of the things, if it's a live interview, and we'll set the stage, setting the stage. I'm at a conference and I'm getting ready to interview you. You're at the event. Before I interview you, I will sit down for a couple of seconds. Go, okay, Jeff, this is how the interview is going to go. I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to hold the microphone. When I put the microphone towards you, you can speak. When I pull it back, I'm going to ask another question. I kind of walk them through the process so it's not total shock value. The microphone has control, so getting people to relax, having that little quick 30-second, hey, I'm Doug, here's what we're going to talk about. That gets their nerves down, puts them at, I won't say edge, at peace. They have an idea what they're up against, as opposed to just grabbing somebody and say, hey, quick impromptu question. So have that little mini prep interview before you actually interview. And I use the idea of holding the microphone because it dictates how things are going to flow. So anything you can say, look in the camera. We look at the camera when I talk to you. People always ask, well, where do I look? Do I look at you? Do I look at the camera? Well, the interviewer can help dictate where you look, but just put them at ease and maybe ask them something offbeat to relax the nerves. Once they're comfortable, once the conversation flows, then you're in. But just getting them the starting point. Hopefully that answered your question.
So what about online interviews like this?
Online, the same way. Before you jump on the call and hit the record button, have a little banter for a couple minutes. How are you switching the camera angles? We're using a tool today, recording this StreamYard for our audience, but there's so many capabilities that you can do. When are you going to be on camera? When are you going to be side by side? So let them know and actually show them. Walk them through some of the things that you're going to be doing. Make sure they're framed in. So there's a lot of preparation. If anything we take out of our interaction today is the word preparation. Anything you can prepare and plan for creativity and action is necessary. So I'd walk them through virtually, same way you would do face to face, but you're just clicking on the screens.
So when it comes to online interviews, what tools do you use?
Online tools, we've got so many inundated. Obviously, Zoom's a tool. I use StreamYard. It's an online. There's RealStream. Your tools can be your microphones, your headsets, and everything else, your lighting. And we're not even talking about editing. You're just talking about the actual interview. What do you use?
For the interview itself, what tools do you actually need?
I use a tool mainly called StreamYard because it allows me to do split screens and it gives me the ability to control the interview. And what I mean by that is if you and I are talking, I could put you on full screen. I could put me on full screen. I could put us side by side. I could share a graphic. Now, there are other programs out there that do that. RealStream, there's a company called Melon, I believe. Zoom has some functionality with that as well. It just gives me interactivity from a price point. I like what StreamYard has to offer and the usability, but there are a ton. You just Google it, online streaming platforms, and their the prices aren't all that high, and you get a quality product because you get an MP4 file afterwards, and it usually strips the audio and video content from it. So as we talk, there's probably 6 or 7 more online streaming programs out there. My advice is go to Google, Bing, or whatever search engine you want to use and take a look at them. A lot of them have free trials. A lot of them you can take a test drive and practice and then find out which one works for you.
So you looked at a lot of tools before you chose StreamYard. Why did you choose StreamYard from the long list of tools that are available?
Ease of use, flexibility to control the interview with just point and clicks. They continue to add more features. Quite frankly, ease of use on my side as well as the interviewee. It makes it easy for them. They don't have to download an app in the cloud. They don't have to do that. All they need is an email account and a webcam, and they're good to go. So it's ease of use. That's the short answer. Ease of use and functionality.
Okay, and so StreamYard records the interview?
It records the interview. It's also built for, the name in StreamYard is being able to take your interview and share it live through social networking sites like LinkedIn Live, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook.
At this point, the interview is over. You end the broadcast and you've got the recording. What's the next step? What do you do from there?
Well, if it's not live, so it's already out there, this is where the real work comes in and labor intensive. You've got to edit the interview. So you've got to clean up to make it presentable, the share. And that next word is share and distribution. Great. We did the interview. I did an interview with Jeff. I had him on my show. I got the footage. I got to edit that footage. And then people got to see the interview. If it wasn't live or you had a live audience or at an event, you got to distribute it. So you got to have a plan for that. Right? Where are you putting it? It comes into goal setting. Are you putting it on LinkedIn? Are you putting it on Twitter? Are you hosting it on YouTube? So you got to edit the footage, and then it's post-production. You got to distribute it because an interview is not good unless people see it.
What tips do you have then for editing interviews so they look good?
Practice and preparation. So start out with here's some of the I'm going to answer that question, but here's some of the mistakes people make once they start learning how to edit, and edit being able to have a starting point, have an ending point, and then you can add you'll get better, you get stronger as you do more editing. Like anything in life, once you practice and learn new skills, it just comes. So being an editor takes time. You can watch a lot of videos on that, but one mistake people like to make is they like to throw in a lot of transitions at first. They learn a new tool and they get crazy with it. What I mean by transitions, where you got the fade in, fade out, but you got like that barn door look or the spiral zoom in, and every editing program has all these crazy things, and they start doing multiple transitions. It's almost like it's too disruptive. Pattern interrupts are good for interviews, and we can talk on that, but having disruption of edits. And what I mean by that is you'll see them, the page flip, the barn door, the zoom, those all work, but we have to work at the right time. You can't just get crazy with your graphics and editing. So the answer to your question is practice, start light, and kind of build. Editing has to have a purpose. And when you're doing an interview, which is structured, which is prep, because you've done your prep work, in the mind, you're thinking about your edits and your questions. So you're already, I think subconsciously, when I'm doing an interview, I'm already in the edit process because I'm thinking about the question. Then, okay, this is a great place to put a transition. This is a great place. So that whole creative flow, and subconsciously, you're doing the editing while you're interviewing. At least I think I do. I don't know about you. Do you feel that way at times? Like I'm asking a question, this might be a good spot to insert this.
Yeah. And so what tools then do you use for editing?
I use a number of tools. I may use Adobe Premiere if I'm heavy, and I use a tool called Sony Vegas. Used to use Windows Movie Maker, but what I use primarily right now is Sony Vegas. I also use a tool called InVideo. It's free. You can go online, and it's really good for those short form clips like portrait style Instagram videos or repurposing content. And then, of course, your cell phone. Just Google video editing apps. There's a ton on there as well. I mean, I prefer to do most of them. 90% of my editing is probably done on a desktop, but there are a ton of video editing programs. DaVinci Resolves, Filmora. There's a ton out there, Mac or PC. But for me, primarily Sony Vegas, InVideo, and Adobe Premiere.
Okay, so let's say you have a 30-minute recording of an interview. How long does it take you then to edit that footage?
It depends on how many graphics and everything. It could take 2 hours for me. If I'm taking a video, two things. I'm going to answer that question within a question. If I'm just doing a standard interview I'm interviewing you for 30 minutes, have a start point, insert a couple of graphics and pictures, that could be an hour. If I'm taking our hour interview and I know what we're doing here, and I want to chop that up into short clips of sound bites, that could be a half a day. It depends on how intricate you want to get with your editing. Stop, start. That's why people go live a lot, because they just hit record and hit stop, share it. They wash their hands of it. They're done. But if you really want to take that and batch it up into shorter clips, add a lot of visual elements and content to that, that's an investment in time.
When it comes to interviewing people, what are the main skills you think that in your mind people need to have to be good at doing interviews?
Comes back to preparation. That's the first thing. Know your audience, and that helps you set up your line of questioning, because at the end of the day, the interview is for the benefit of the audience and maybe for yourself doing the interview if you want to learn something. And then obviously the big one is listening, being able to listen to the response and being able to piggyback on that response if it's insightful, if you need to take it there. A lot of times you need to shut up, ask your questions, and let the person answer the question, but being able to follow up with questions. So that's listening skills. You also have to set the stage. You got to wear a couple of hats. When you're doing the interviews, you also got to let them coach up the person for their responses. You don't want to tell them what to say, but let them know, hey, we got a structured time frame here. Because we've all been there before, and I'm probably doing it right now in this response where you get the long-winded question. They're going on and on and on. Well, you can control that to a certain extent, but it comes down to listening, when not to interrupt, and being able to, if you do preparation prior to the interview, it will make it more fluid. They'll be expecting the question, and it may make the conversational flow a little bit better. And the key word is conversation. Make it a conversation.
So looking back, what are the biggest mistakes that you've made that you would be able to tell other people to avoid?
I'll make sure you turn the camera on and hit the record button would be the number one mistake I've made. I mean, I'm not to joke about it. We've been there. I got this. No, I don't. It's happening at live events. So always double check. And that's why I say have a mic check, a video check, and have a preparation call. So failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Said it right this time. Make sure you've got everything in there. Not listening. I go back and I look at my footage when I interview, and that person's giving me a great answer, and they're actually giving me a nugget of something new that's insightful in their answer. And I'm going, in my mind, I'm thinking about question number 2. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let's fall back. Let's dig a little deeper on that response. I mean, sometimes the interview is laid out for you by the answer to the question. I'm learning as I get stronger and do more of these to let and it becomes more conversational because they brought up a key point. So don't get so caught up in question number. I say preparation, and I'm not trying to say the opposite of that. You got question 1, 7, you got 6 agenda. I call them talking points that you want to cover, but make it fit in the conversation. And very well, they may be able to answer 2 of those talking points within a question if you hold back and lead them to the right direction.